Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this morning session on AI and the regulation. My pleasure it's to welcome here four speakers today. Yann Bonnet, you are Deputy CEO of Cyber Campus. Sambuliskia, CEO and founder from RS Strategy. Bertrand Payet, you're the head of technology innovation at Latoi, and Garros Mathias, she a lawyer at Mathias Avocat. Thank you for being here today. We are going to speak about regulation and AI, which is a topic that is not just a legal topic. There are, of course, political challenges, industrial challenges that cover more vast, more geopolitical and influence that we're going to try to decrypt this morning. There's already a certain number of countries and groups of countries have started to position themselves on this topic, like Europe, of course, with the AI Act, which was mentioned earlier, but the US, China, UK, or Australia, or UK again. Many countries that have approaches and different ambitions, different agendas. So we're trying to decrypt this morning. Thank you, four of you, to be here today. And we need to, of course, we can't go around the AI Act. That is the first legal constraining and regulation of AI tool in the world. Garros, can you maybe use a lawyer remind of what are the main characteristics of the AI Act? How is it different apart from the existence? The fact that it's the first one. Well, hello, thank you for having invited me. I'm very happy to be here. It's a very rich panel with many experts. Yes, this European document has been symbolically voted for at the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago. Symbolic because the non-definitive version of the text is going to be amended by some legal translators, so it's going to take time. So we're all going to know we're going to be the EU elections, so the rhythm of the mandate has been accelerated. So the symbol is very strong, and to recall what you said, I mean, there's innovation, there's trust, there's not just law. And this text, as a lawyer, we're used to having a risk-based approach. This is based on a risk-based approach. It's got a certain number of keywords that are not just legal terms. Because when we are a lawyer, in the first law classes, we learn two things. One is that law is not ethical in the IA Act. One of the key words, and that is going to be very interesting to see how this works in the governance, is the ethics of AI. And we are learning the second point at the beginning of our law classes is that law is not moral. For the moment, we haven't got the term moral anchored in this text, but we have the term ethic, and we have the social challenges. What does behind the risk approach? That is something we've been doing for years as a professionals. But in the regulation approach, a risk-based approach was something new. The novelty, you know, it is the fact was the GRPD that introduces this pragmatic and operational approach via the risks. GDPR, sorry. And so the AI is classified by risks, an approach that the Commission does not want to block innovation, does not want to block the development of usages that are already here. So we're not even talking about hurdles, we're talking about reality, but it wants to build a framework around it to valorize the respects of our fundamental rights, to avoid discriminations. That is why there are scales, three types of systems of AI within the risks-based analysis. So this is a text that is very important because of its juridical structure, legal structure, based on the GDPR, because I'm here with the comparisons with the GDPR. It's absolutely not the same approach. It's absolutely not the scope. It's not the same parameter. Why? Because indeed the GDPR is more focused towards us, the respect of our rights, And as I said earlier on, the regulation on artificial intelligence is more turned towards innovation, products and services. And we're concerned by that, of course, but it's not the scope of application, the first scope of application. So we're not going to go against it. That would not be very constructive, and personal data is everywhere. We are not going to say we're going to learn to work with these documents, this text, just as we do it with other legal texts. The position is here. There's other legal documents, and the legislative inflation, particularly in the European field, is extremely rich. Be it the AA Act, it's not the only text there's many other legislative texts on the IA Act that are going to be adopted and implemented, particularly with the responsibility in faulty issues or other challenges that are extremely important. So we need to know the scopes of applications. We know to the risk management that is different compared to IA. And of course, because this text, once it's going to be adopted and published, it's going to be published in the legal register of the EU. There's going to be different entry levels based on the technology. And the first one is going to be to ban high-risk AIs with a high risk of you mentioned the GDPR and other texts. Yes, the IA Act is not arriving on a virgin territory. Bertrand, maybe can we go back to the GDPR and understand how it frames the IA today with other tools and how it articulates with the AA Act once one of the AA Act is in force. Thank you very much for having invited me here. Yes, indeed, the GDPR, it's the successor of the law Informatique et Liberté that was voted in France. And in the 1970s, starting of the 1970s, we had laws that was regulating data treatment. A data treatment looks like an algorithm, and the IA is simply the last generation of algorithm with particular properties that create new risk, like statistical issues that creates a certain number of biases issues. But we have a legal framework that applies to all this data, the treatment, the users, with the companies, but of course the institutions that develop these tools. So this has created the NIL to deal with it. With the directive on police and justice for the law enforcement authorities, but we felt the need to precise with the CNIL how the GDPR and the particularity of these new generation IA systems that are based on great quantities of data. So we published a first lot of documentation. We're going to soon publish another one, particularly to show that a certain number of principle of the GDPR that seemed a contradiction, like the minimizing data when you need to treat a great quantity of data. We want to do a general usage, and in the IA, there is a general purpose AI that is being mentioned, so we can ask ourselves, so the GDPR asks for a finality. So we try to provide an answer to that, saying, well, these principles, they can be applied in an adapted way to AI system, particularly in a scientific research context, but also typically in the context of developing generic bricks for AI. There are other aspects also. There's an important topic on the AI that we're talking about, on the generative AIs, with a link in the cyber AI based on CTI data, events, log data, event data, from data that we get from another system that was thought for something else, how I can reuse this data to use AI. Here again, there's a GDPR disposition that allows us to answer this and to be compatible with a certain number of elements. The way we see it, it's different. It's for the solution providers. These are people that we see as subcontractors, and from this point of view, we see this as a opportunity to facilitate, to reduce the legal uncertainties for those who want to use high-risk AI, like human resources. I have an AI that is going to evaluate my CV, so that this is going to be high-risk usage. And so for the treatment of this data, he's going to have to meet a certain number of expectations. And for instance, in the transparency expectations, we're going to try have them converge with the AI in order to have an exercise that enriches itself mutually and not two different exercises. And then just to finish, there's also in the AI regulation, it covers a certain number of regulated sectors, specifically weapons, toys, chemical devices that will have to, these are sectorial dispositions that will be very important also. On top of that, on the topic of the personal data, there's one topic that was a source of tension and frictions during the negotiations around the AI Act, is the issue of innovation. It shows that the different approaches that the different countries can have within the EU. So some people say that too much regulation, too much limitation is a hurdle to innovation. Yes, it's true that in the debate we heard a lot about this opposition. I don't know if it's very fruitful, this opposition between innovation and regulation and hurdle to innovation. I think that AI, it's basically can be a solution or a poison to a society. AI in itself is not bad. It's the usage, the way we use it, that sometimes are going to raise questions. So sometimes it's a political issue. And what is important is to regulate some use cases, like you've explained it earlier. It's true that some use cases, I'm thinking about things like that were implemented in China, for instance, the possibility of having a social scoring, for instance, that is maybe not something that we want to see happening in Europe. And clearly in the text, there are use cases where we say, okay, we have a certain number of basic principles, some freedoms that are important, and I think that's the first point. Then these usages, I mean, AI is not something new. It's been existing for a couple of years. Therefore, now since 1 year, we have ChatGPT in the mention. That's 100 million users in less than 2 months. That's millions of people who use this tool with. Sometimes without really, the tool is maybe not even completely baked through. It's even in the cyber tools, in the use of AI that's not been thought about. We don't even have researchers or academics in that area. So we as cyber experts, we're going to have to define a certain number of rules and principles for these new tools to not become a poison for us. This year in 2024, we have had 76 elections taking place. We never had so many tools with AI able to manipulate the elections in the population. So here again, there's a social issue here that's being raised, and that we need to frame this. So I think that we'll need to get out of this opposition. It's important for Innovate to have a framework. Nothing's worse than to innovate in launching a startup and suddenly realize afterwards that we are in the illegality. So that is, for me, that is a progress, that is a necessity. And for once, at European level, we managed to define rules before the tool even develops itself. So it's a great opportunity. Yeah, legal safety, as you mentioned. Yeah, in order to be able to innovate, you need to know where you're going and to have a safe framework. So innovation, regulation can also be a tool for competitivity. How can this European regulation be a competitivity tool for the European ecosystem? Yeah, again, I think it clarifies the framework, and in the text, it's also a guide of the risk-based approach for AI. And so I think that just like all regulations, it's also a way to impose a certain number of principles, even at world level. Somewhat what we've seen with the GDPR. I remember at the debate around the GDPR, we heard lots of criticism saying you're going to stun development and innovation. And back then I was at the US a couple of months later in San Francisco. They were the first ones to basically copy the GDPR because it's actually important, faced with all these usages, to have the trust of the users. And the trust goes via regulation of a certain number of elements. So that people want to have a framework in order to ensure safety as a user and to ensure that the AIs that will be developed in Europe are trusted AIs. And I think it's our job now, via regulation and also via security, via other elements, it's our turn to build AIs of trust that will be different from the ones that will be developed elsewhere, like in the US or in China. So trust is a differentiating and competitive advantage. We spoke about the economical and political challenges right now. This IA regulation, there's a big conflict around it. It's very controversial. There's influences, there's lobbying, and also economic warfare. What are these challenges today? Thank you for having invited me. I'm very happy to meet a certain number of experts I already know that are very high-level experts. For me, there are things that already exist, exist a lot, very existing, and there are other things that are missing. And what is missing, that is always what I'm interested in. And from the operational point of view, I want to get back to what Ian just said. The GDPR arrived and everyone said, oh my God, we're not being able to do anything. It's going to be hurdles everywhere. And a couple of years later, we have a whole industry, for instance, like the trans technologies, like PETs, that are actually a industry that did not exist before that, absolutely not, and that's at that scale, only 10 years ago. And so the framework has created an opening that the GDPR has created. By keeping its value without bastardizing itself, the GDPR is not is a text that says that the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms are not negotiable in the digital world. That's what the GDPR says. It's also what the AI Act says with this risk-based approach. It's an operational way of saying we have principles and we have values. And so the question is, when we say we can't do this, if you do this, I'm going to fine you so much percentages of your turnover. That is the easy approach. What's missing, it's what it allows. The GDPR has allowed many usages. What will the AI Act or the NIS2 or the AI Act, what will it allow? What will it make possible? This operational approach, for me, when you are trying to go onto that aspect, because it's a very political aspect, it's a completely political aspect, it's become a far more than it was before, than 5 years ago. What we see is that Europe, if we want to speak about Europe, we're 2 months away from European elections. If we want to speak about Europe, we realize that the European approach, this kind of third way that Mr. Borrell called for, it does not go all the way. What do I mean with that? Is that we have public policies to promote We are going to do incubators, we're going to help startups, we're going to generate an ecosystem, we're going to invest, we're going to soften a certain number of rules of chosen immigration in order to attract talents from elsewhere, because there is also a big bottleneck for us. These are promotional policies and protection policies that we control the exports, and that will also have a very strong impact on the business, to say it very clearly, who can buy which technology, for instance. And the world of the globalized business will be slightly less easy to navigate in the coming years because of these needs to emerge, to reinforce and to consolidate, etc. So that is what I call the protection policies. And then we have the principal policies, which we just mentioned with the GDPR, with the IA Act. We say we're going to do a regulation, we're going to define the rules for living together that are based on our founding principles, our democratic values, etc., etc. Where I see missing elements is that all this is being done at the level of the member states. And the question for which I haven't heard really a clear answer is, why is it important that the AI Act is the first constraining legal framework in the world? It's not the first one. There's already 300 different guidance frameworks that exist for years. Okay, it's the first one. But what counts is that 27 sovereign member states have sat together around the table. Sometimes their hands were a little bit forced, sometimes going against their wills, and they managed to agree on rules, saying, okay, these are our values, this is how we want things to be done and not anywhere else. Maybe at the beginning there will be a cost associated, but we want to move forward in this direction. And this is what brings me back to the second question that you asked on the international aspect, because this projection of power, that is what we're looking for when we're talking about geopolitics, because you can tell yourself anything about the 50 millions for startups here and there. From the moment on that we are in the international aspect of countries, how do I project my power? And this is where I'm missing things in the AI Act, and this, I say, maybe AI Act is just a hiding. It's just a little veil that hides the actual missing elements, because Mr. Borrello does a fantastic work. We have the external services that does fantastic work too. But what is the green number? Which number do I call when I want to talk about the EU diplomacy? Who do I call if I want to talk about the EU diplomacy? We haven't got anyone. So if we want to really project our power, if we want to have an influence, especially in a situation where technologies that have AI components that can be used for double search, we've seen it at the Munich conference a couple of weeks ago. We also have a challenge of defending ourselves. What is happening at our borders, the imminent arrival of our dear friend Agent Orange, Donald Trump, who is going to dismantle a certain number of strategic partnerships. So we have this question of how we are going to project this power, for which we have the components at national level, at the European level. How are we going to project this power? And this is what I'm missing at the moment. This is what I don't see happening with the AI Act, and also with the package of measures that remain a very operational measure. It's going to be certification, it's going to be implementation, it's going to be more back kitchen issues. So here's my question, is because I'm asking more questions than I'm answering them. How are we going to do this in order to move forward together? Because here we have shown with this first initiative that we've been able, at the 27, more or less, the private interest, to have a common position and to say, okay, this is how we want to deal with this. How are we going to continue this? How do we make an instrument of soft power, of influence? Yes, we're going to get back to that in 2 minutes.
Avant pour
Perhaps just before we do that, to follow on from what you were saying, there are other countries who have decided to position themselves and how their approach is differently. And what does that say about the European position? What's interesting to come back to the idea of influence that we're talking about is all the initiatives converge, well, more or less at the same time, along the lines of the AI Act. In the UK, there are things going on in the UK. There's a whole effervescence. There's a lot going on, it's all a buzz, basically. Clearly, yes, based on what you're saying, yes, it's not just the Europeans who are on a race to regulation. Clearly, this is a moment where there's a convergence at the global level. But in this race towards convergence, there's no pilot. So it's a bit of a mess, quite frankly. Everybody's going for it at the regional level, the national level. There are a few examples we've talked about. Of course, we just talked about the AI Act in the EU to attempt to protect users, protect innovators. And I think that this approach is extremely interesting. That what you were emphasizing, this approach with 26 or 27, it's a major step forward. It can be an advantage, I think, further on down the line. In the US, quite clearly, there's an economic war going on with China. They're in a different context. They have stakeholders who are dominant. They have giants. So my impression is that there's a lot of declaration going on, a lot of soft law, and in fact, it's quite amusing almost because they don't have an overall approach. What you're starting to see is some laws at the level of each of the American states. So that, and we'll see a few months or a few years from now, we might have a fragmentation, in fact, of the legal frameworks with in the different American states. Exactly what was said about Europe, some years ago. So this will be very differentiating for us compared to the US if that happens. And in China, it's very interesting what's going on in terms of AI. Well, they're a little bit in the same context as the American. There's the economic war. They want to protect their major stakeholders as well, their major players. And they have an approach, a regulatory approach, from what I understand, which is much more agile. So it's much more targeted and sector-based as well. So I think that we really have to keep an eye on this. Well, it's China, so it's regulation that is dictated by the Communist Party to the main stakeholders, the major players, and we see in China there is the idea is to better control the population as well, or a mass surveillance approach as well, which of course we do not want in Europe. And in England, we see, well, they are positioning themselves on existential risks, but they want to enter the game by dictating standards. And that is the battle, is who is going to succeed in imposing their standards, who is the group at the global level who will succeed in doing that will have won the first stage at any rate. And coming back to what you were saying, in Europe there are 500 million consumers in good health, well educated with financial resources. So we have the capacity to impose our rules for foreign actors who would like to enter the European market. And I think that that's what we need to do in the years to come. And the tools that we have to try to impose our model, tool that was already present in the GDPR, is the extraterritorial scope of the AI Act. Garance, how is that expressed in concrete terms? What does that consist of? What is the extraterritorial scope of the AI Act? What could it be and what could it bring us? Well, I'm going to answer the question. I just want to come back to a few points. So there are three keywords which I think will connect to your question. Protect, respect, and repair. These keywords are not mine. These keywords are the United Nations keywords, because a few days ago there was a vote of a very important resolution, vote on artificial intelligence. So it's not global regulation, of course. It's a vote. It's adoption of a resolution on AI. But the name of the resolution is important. It's seizing the opportunities offered by artificial intelligence systems on securing consciously for sustainable development. So there is the community of the United Nations there, respecting fundamental rights, protecting them, repairing them, and establishing that framework at that level. And that's also very important because it's the first time this is happening in the world. It was the plenary assembly of the United Nations with this sort of text. And it's using the same principles with the challenges related to sustainable development in addition to that, of course. That's very important because, and in the IA Act, it's a package. There's certification, there's responsibility, there's all sorts of things. There are challenges and issues that concern all of us, but sustainable development is not emphasized enough, to my mind, in the AI Act. So to come back to this dimension of extraterritoriality, we have it in this whole global movement of regulation. There's already regulation applying in some countries. There are already texts that have been enacted and are in force. So now, coming to Europe, well, I'm not going to come back to saying, should we have a Europe of defense? Well, we've had these discussions for 40 or 50 years, and that's for the politicians to decide. But there are challenges, there are issues for a secure framework for all the consumers, and that's all of us. Those are visions at the time of the common market. I'm coming back to the founders, Jean Monnet. Why did we found these communities that we today call the European Union? They give to establish a framework to protect, respect, repair, so to give trust, confidence to all our citizens, to all the residents, not to say citizen, to say all the residents, all those who live within this common space that we have chosen with freedom of exchange, freedom of movement, freedoms that are extremely important. So to come back to the values of the European Union, the fundamental values. So when there are going to be products and services that are going to reach the population of the European Union, they will have to comply with a certain framework. And we talked a lot about that when we talked about the GDPR, with the scope of application of the GDPR. But it wasn't only that text, there were other texts as well. There was the competition law, which is one of the pillars of European construction. And there are texts that are going along the same lines with the cyber, the Commissioner Thierry Breton was talking about a cyber shield. So what we want to do is have a view of society, a plan for society, well, in the philosophical and in the legal sense of the term. And this AI Act is actually expressing that, conveying that in terms of the services, the products that it's going to be offering, and what the European consumer is going to have access to, and these products and services are going to have to comply with a number of standards. That is really the challenge, but we already know that. Now, how is all of that going to be implemented? Well, that's another story. Well, about the hard law component, well, a text has to be complied with. There are sanctions which will deter anyone from not complying. And of course, we'll have to see how all of that is applied, because there are many possible options. And before people are sanctioned, there may be formal warnings, summons, or, a whole framework that can be established to be able to establish a framework for all of that and how it will work. But there is a desire to secure, to protect, to repair issues related to liability. This is extremely strong in terms of the terminology. Now, looking at what happened in the US, there are decrees, a presidential order in October regarding AI, an order a few weeks ago on personal data. And that's actually a European influence. which is very strong with the notion of a sector. So in the US, the medical sector, for example, with respect to AI and the use of medical data, which is sensitive data, but not only in the data protection sense, but also in the sense of our fundamental freedoms, in the industrial sense of the term. There is going to be a specific sector-based regulation. We've talked about that, and there are already specific regulations in other areas, and this is going to be something that's going to complete and complement what's been done. So to come back to some important keywords that have meaning, that convey meaning, and it's important when we're talking about AI to remind us why we're doing this. Absolutely. Now, regarding the tools, the normative influence, there are norms and standards that we talked about earlier, Jan. And in addition to the AI Act and other legal texts that exist, Europe on the one hand and, outside Europe, other countries are working on a corpus of standards that will allow us to concretely implement these legal texts. We talked about this earlier. Who dictates the standards will then control the market, really. So, Bertrand, are we moving on to a sort of war of standards, And do we have a chance of winning that in Europe? Well, the AI regulation, the AI Act, there is a list of 10 standards that the Commission has asked the European Standardization Committee to come up with. I think this is quite a new strategy. Well, to my knowledge, it is. The specific way of CE branding, of course, CE branding that we'll have it's quite new in the digital world. In the more, fundamental freedoms, economic models. So we have an approach to regulation here that's quite innovative for AI, for at least part of the actors, the players. So the issue of standards, of course, here is crucial. So the Commission has understood this quite clearly. They have they've asked for these standards to be identified. And for us at the French authority, Data Protection Authority, CNIL, and AFNOR for the Standards Authority, we are looking at those as well. And we see that there are many American companies actually involved in drawing up these standards. So from my viewpoint I don't know that much about creation of standards, but we see global companies who've decided to invest in the standardization topic. So some will be in other fora, they'll be in ISO or CCC for more recent bodies. But the fact that these standards, and including European standards, are actually drawn up by people who are working on projects at ISO that are quite, US-centric, it shows that there will be a form of standardization, but the difference is that only very few Europeans are working on the American organization projects and focused on the American innovation ecosystem, and is trying to come up with some standards that are going to be used for one of the dimensions of regulation in the US, which is quite absent in Europe, which is public tenders. Just to follow on from what Jan said a little bit earlier, with Joe Biden's decree order, it's not saying that on the commercial market you can do what you like, but the federal public provisioning and order, we're going to ask people to comply with a number of rules and standards. And for the federal government, we will only buy from people who follow those norms and standards. So, and then those people are going to try to export those standards to Europe or elsewhere. Well, it's exactly what happened. Now that I'm a little bit older, it's exactly what happened with the cloud 13 or 14 years ago, when the US federal government said, we're going to allow the use of the cloud for the federal authorities, create a certification, which is you'll need to enter that for the cloud to be authorized, and that accelerated regulation. giving a framework for companies to say, okay, we have to comply with this, that, and that, and then to be able to conquer new markets. So the last point, perhaps, on standards, and is that, well, there's the risk. Well, we're talking about difficult topics here, robust AI or human control. Well, at this stage, the work is still underway, but this raises quite a few questions, even for experts, to say, what does it actually mean? What does it mean to standardize human control on an AI system? So this is a notion that we started to think about at the French authority, CNIL. I read an article on automated decision-making, which is connected to that. So human control, that can mean many things. It can just be someone who says to the machine, okay, or it can be a real in-depth understanding of what the machine is doing. So it's you know, the standardization work will need to possibly adapt to the use of AI depending on the context. It's not the same thing whether it's for the police or for human resources, for example. Rainer, I saw that you were approving what was being said. Would you like to add something on that topic, in particular on the place that, well, we're not talking about war, of course, but this opposition, let's put it that way, between these two, well, in the environment that we were talking about. Well, there's clearly a cultural difference between our friends from across the Atlantic and ourselves in Europe. I'm always amused. But I'm told, oh, we can innovate in the US because there are no rules. That's actually not true at all. In fact, what we do in Europe is that we all, well, several of us get together, sometimes many of us get together, just to see the lobbying on the GDPR and on the AI Act. You know, there was quite a lot of that going on. So several of us get together and we prepare a text that says, well, this is where you start. You have to do this, that, and that. And so we move on at this frequency. We will review the rules. We will inspect, control what you're doing. We'll monitor. If anything is out of line, well, you'll get a big fine. But we know. Well, of course, then there are very complex issues such as the remit of the different administrative authorities, and we're starting to see that more and more. Whether it's with the GDPR, it was actually quite simple. Well, the CNIL, the French authority, is the CNIL, but with the AI Act, in fact, we have texts that are transversal, horizontal, and we'll have different remits that will be interacting. So the question we can ask ourselves at the national level is, how is all of this going to fit together? And this is more of an administrative issue. It's application, implementation at the national level. But we know what the rules are asking us to do. We know the framework. It's true that the first step is a little bit difficult. Well, you need to really stick with it. But in the US, it's not the same approach. In the US, if you're told, well, here are some recommendations, it will depend on the different federal administrations. Well, it would be a good idea if you could do it like this, you know, the low-hanging fruits we're talking about, and then we'll see. Which means, in fact, it's not that there are no rules, that the rules are sort of broken down among all sorts of different administrations. So you can see after 3 months, the monitoring that was done by the White House of the implementation of Biden's AI order, which dates back to the 1st of November or something like that. And you just have to see the pages and pages of this and that administration did this, the other one did that. So that is a difference which is substantial. And in fact, at the end of the day, you say, well, there are no rules because you can do what you like, but that's not true. But on the other hand, the lack of clarity has led to what people have called a beta culture. So to put on the market, beta culture, to use us as beta testers, things that are not perhaps ready for production. Things are, well, there are bugs at the cyber level. We're going to have that aspect that is going to come out quite strongly. And this is where I don't agree with Garance, where she says that the debate is not ours to have. Well, I'm saying yes, it is. Because if we want to work together as a society and as a digital society, we must participate in these discussions and debates. And I fully agree with Bertrand on the absence of Europeans in the bodies where certification patterns and requirements are drawn up. To have worked on this for some of my clients, it's extremely specific, very, very technical, where you, in 3 months, you will learn what people took 15 years to learn and develop. So there again, you really have to stick with it. But I was the only French practitioner there. There were Americans, there were people from China, people from Germany, and there were people from Italy, yes. And that was about it. And so you say to yourself, well, this really painstaking work that you really have to translate into normal language, you know, because we're not all specialists in all these topics. Well, this work is not done. We don't do it because we don't have time, we don't have the resources, but there is a real issue there. How you stop, because all of us are the end user for somebody, because we are being used as guinea pigs almost. And how do we change that situation to be in control or to make decisions on how we're going to live together, with what tools and how we're going to use those tools, with the business impact, whatever you like after that, that will come. But, and where the American authority with the hopes that Biden had to have a law, a federal law on data privacy and protection, they opened a consultation, which remained a consultation. But in Europe, just the way we function and the way the CNIL works as well is doing great work. We open to public consultation. Often we're the only ones who answer, the people who are actually doing the things. But it's also, the onus is also on us to bring people together, to go out to meet people and to hear what they have to say. And when I give a talk on what is Gen AI in a media library in the Paris region, people are afraid of being replaced by ChatGPT. So there's no point in telling them, no, don't be silly, you know, everything's going to be okay. There's no point in doing that. There are real reasons to be afraid. And we cannot express technical and technological realities in a way that is logical to them. We cannot ensure the application, the implementation of all the rules that we are writing and imposing. Just to talk about the CNIL of the French authority, I'm sure you don't have that much funding at CNIL, or not enough in any way, to do all the inspections and monitoring that you should be doing. So the more rules you have, the more you're going to involve institutions with different remits, different jurisdictions, and you're going to have more and more bureaucracy, because we don't really know how to do it any other way. And then it's going to be less and less operative on a daily basis to be able to establish that link, that connection. So we have principles, but are people actually applying them? What's happening today when you have scale-ups with over 30 million, for example, to do image generation from text, but most of those images are deep fake, nudes, sexual abuse, including sexual abuse on minors. What do we do about that? But we have a great deal of principles, yes. So we have challenges, there are stakes. We have momentum right now. What are we going to do after that? Where are we going with this? Where are we going with all this power that we have? Because there are many of us standing together, we can do something, so that's good. All right, so what are the next steps? Garance, perhaps you'd like to react to whether we participate in this discussion or not? Yes, I don't know if perhaps I was misunderstood. There are two things. There's a problem with culture, of legal culture. Rainer said so, I said so as well. We all know that. Anglo-Saxon law is not conceived, construed, and interpreted in this and built up in the same way as what we are doing in mainland Europe. To simplify, we're not on fundamental notions in the US. The law is mostly there to serve the economy. If I sum it up, that's the general idea. So the executive orders that were handed down in many areas, it's not at all the same legal, political dimension as a European regulation. So all of us have a role to play, as each one of us as a citizen, whether we're in France, whether elsewhere in Europe, or whether it's what we want to say about how we want to live together as a society, including relating to AI. So what we're looking to is to define a protective public order, protecting us even from ourselves. Sorry. So to have barriers in our societies that are going to protect a number of accesses. So this is the public protection. And then the direction. Where do we want to go? Do we want to go there together? And where are we going together? So then there's the regulatory aspect, the rules in the legal sense of the term. Now, when I said that there was no more action, it's when the law is there. Well, the law exists, it was voted, or the regulation is voted. And there are positions, looking for trade-off, compromise. That's part of the DNA of the construction of Europe. So we're going to take the law, we're going to interpret the law. There will be the control authorities, how they interpret it. But as a lawyer, my position will be to interpret the law. As a lawyer, first of all, of course, you analyze the texts, the bills, to better understand them, to understand what is at stake. But we are all together as and we're all living together as actors of that life together, that common existence. And we're all convinced of that. But once the text is actually there, the idea is going to be perhaps to challenge it through positions, looking in litigation, in disputes, to defend positions. And like the General Data Protection Regulation, the AI Act will give rise to decisions, will give rise to litigation, to disputes, certainly. And it's already happening in the US, and there are many legal questions coming up there just to clarify what I meant to say earlier. All right, well, this question about control, sanction, Rainer was saying, well, the more texts you have, of course, the more you have to apply them. But okay, that's the rule of the game. I don't know if you'd like to add something, Bertrand, on this point. Well, this point is important because what Rainer explained, what we see in the US is that there's an executive order that says something, but there's a mobilization of the American administrative authorities, administrations, to look at the technological developments of AI. And paradoxically, in fact, there's very little regulation, but there are like entire battalions of public officers who are going to be involved. So everyone's saying, I'm allowed to do this. How can I fine-tune my model? What must I do? So businesses are actually quite eager to get feedback from public bodies, public organizations, because often there are societal issues, there are bias issues, discrimination issues. So it's difficult for a business by itself to have an opinion on what is the ethical response to a given problem. So they are always eager to hear from academics, from the public authorities. And in the US, there's in terms of the way the regulation is, it's different, but there's real administrative support. There's a risk because in Europe, of course, it's important with this AI Act to bring the discussion, the debate back to Europe, to say we're not just going to be talking about this in the US, we need to talk about these regulations in Europe. So that's going to allow us to have a sort of balance of power. but there's a real challenge here to have the workforce, to have the people we need to be able to support the adoption, the implementation, because the risk with these rules is to create legal uncertainty, and that's difficult because there's no reply. When there's a problem, there's no response, and competitors in other countries, well, they have fewer legal risks, and on top of that, when they ask questions and they want to do things the right way, they actually have someone to answer their questions. So I think that there's a real challenge here. There's something that's really at stake, is the implementation of these regulations and how they're actually going to be applied. When I heard the head of the French ANSI talking about the NIS2 directive. At CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, there are 300 of us to ensure implementation. That we're only 300 of us for 3 million people to check how we are implementing all these data protection regulations. So ANSI also, are they actually going to be able to support them, inspect, monitor, and sanction them if necessary? And so for AI, it's going to be the same. We need to ensure that the public authorities have the means, the resources to support companies, businesses, and not leave them alone with the text. All right, I see. Well, there are other regulation authorities, for example, the competition authorities who are mobilized in the US and in France as well on this topic. So you're not alone. You're not the only ones who are going to be sanctioning, I think. But Jan, would you like to react to what was said? Yes, just very quickly. Listening to you, I completely share the idea that we have to improve. We in France have to improve what we're doing in this race to standardization, and at the international level as well, to be able to have an impact, to have influence. And I've also observed something, which is that we, as cyber experts, we have a role to play. We have a huge role to play in securing AI, and it's there are many things that are for securing AI that we need to work on. I'm very worried about when once attackers understand that many AIs are used but are not at all secured. This is going to be an extremely painful experience for us. So, and this is something that I'd really like to bring up now and emphasize now. You know, maybe make the best use of the cyber campuses where we have major players, we have researchers, we have the AFNOR, the French Standards Authority, to think about this, to think about securing security in AI, and to actually, you know, exert some influence, in fact, internationally, to have a role in this discussion. And that's what was said yesterday at the opening of the of this event. So we need to exchange views, we need to talk more, and maybe bodies like the campus, not only in Paris, but of course in the other French regions and in other European countries, this should also allow us to have those discussions, to share those ideas. And if, just to sum up the points you made this morning, well, it feels like on IA regulation, there's not really a pilot on the plane. And many standards, texts are going to be coming up. So what are the next steps? How do we use that? How do we work with AI to project power, to regain competitiveness, and to stay active on this battle of standards? So I'd really like to thank all four of you for this extremely interesting session. And I think you raised as many questions as you answered, but that was also the purpose. So thank you to all four of you, and thank you to all of you for listening. I think there'll be some other sessions this afternoon, so don't hesitate to come back. We'll be happy to have you here at the beginning of the afternoon. Thank you.